graphic designers and brand designers know to keep hold of copyright, or at least they have to grant it to their client, whatever their agreement is. They tend to know about that much. And then beyond that, it's not even really considered.
Hello, and welcome to the brandtuned podcast, which covers all things brand related, including the essential trademark and IP dimension. I'm your host, Shireen Smith, IP lawyer, brand manager, and author of the upcoming book, Brandtuned, The New Rules of Branding, Strategy, and Intellectual Property. Do sign up on brandtuned.com to attend the book launch on the 28th of September 2021. Hello everyone, I'm Shireen Smith of the Brandtuned podcast, and my guest today is Joe Gregory, who started life as a graphic designer, and in his earlier days of his career, he was involved in branding, digital marketing, advertising, and such like. Now he's the co-founder of Rethink Press, the publishing company with whom I published my first two books. So welcome to the Brandtuned podcast, Joe. Tell us a bit more about yourself.
Thanks for having me, Shireen. So my background, I started as an entrepreneur at a young age. I was 19, so I worked in advertising for a year first. I went straight in with a portfolio to get a job. Worked for a year in advertising, really loved it, really loved everything I was doing. I was working with existing brands. It wasn't a company that created brands from scratch. And I was just inspired by my boss. He said he'd started his business at 19. And I thought I could probably do that. So I did. And it was really early days, 1997, when the World Wide Web was becoming a thing.
Right.
And we were doing that. So my first business was really web-based.
Mm-hmm.
And I was lucky enough to work with some large companies very early on in the business growth. So it grew quite quickly.
Great.
And I was working with, talking of brands, two large financial services companies, Commercial Union and General Accident, were one of my early clients. And so they were just merging. They were becoming CGU, if you remember that, way back in the late 90s. And then they became, obviously, back to Norwich Union after becoming Aviva. So that was my kind of first taste of working with a big brand and actually seeing the assets and the collateral they need to keep sharp from that early stage, and actually managing it was kind of an eye-opener to me, because I was kind of naive, rough and ready, and didn't really understand, how these big things happen. So that's it. And obviously you've referenced Rethink Press. I was working with small expert companies. So my ideal clients were small expert companies, and we did digital marketing for them. It wasn't called digital marketing then, but that's what we were doing, effectively.
Yeah.
Everything online, marketing strategy. And then I co-wrote a book on what we were doing, which we were calling lean marketing. And we never trademarked that. And in a way where you see lean has become the thing it has, I wish we had. We wrote a book on that, and it became a useful tool in growing our business. And I thought, actually, if I could get all of my clients to write books, I've got a completely different business here. So that's what we did in 2003. After 6 years, me and my co-director at the time, my sister, Debs, we changed direction completely from a marketing consultancy to become a publishing business. And you met me, I think, when we were Rethink Press. So that was kind of several years later. So that's the background. It's a bit of a kind of a hodgepodge of things I've done, but that's where I got to and became Rethink.
Sure. So basically, when I wrote my first book, or Legally Branded, one of the issues that was bothering me was that branding people didn't seem to understand IP. I'd go to create partnerships with them, and then I'd end up having to explain all about IP, and they were very interested, but they didn't actually understand it. And actually now, nearly 10 years on, it's no better. And I've actually realized this because they're not trained. Graphic designers, marketers don't actually receive training in IP, and they're expected to just pick up this knowledge that they need. What's your experience with?
I think you're right. I think beyond copyright, so graphic designers and brand designers know to keep hold of copyright, or at least they have to grant it to their client, whatever their agreement is. They tend to know about that much. And then beyond that, it's not even really considered. And I think this is my generalization on people that are drawn to that kind of industry. We are much more interested in the big idea and the creative than we are with the stuff that the kind of what I'd call red pen stuff that's really, really essential, but can kind of spoil the fun when you've got a great idea and then you're like, we can't use it. So I think it's partly a willful ignorance to the stuff that's actually really vitally important, especially when you're building a business and you're building those assets as part of a business that can be sold or scaled or partner with other people. That's obviously the one side, and then there's the other side where you may actually be infringing somebody else's trading name and come unstuck later on after you've built considerable momentum around the wrong thing. And I do think it's partially because people that are attracted to the creative side don't really want to deal with the legislative, the admin side of things. And I think what you're doing, the work you're doing to actually shine a light on that side of it is critical. And I think it should, if it's not already, be a fundamental aspect of any graphic designer's training if they're going towards branding.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that entrepreneurs, business owners, just don't really understand IP, and they assume if they go to someone for branding that person knows everything they need to know, including the law. Really, they're not interested in the law either because they don't understand why it's significant. So it creates this situation where you can get brands that are created that are absolutely worthless. I don't know whether maybe what should be happening is that designers should understand what the client is hoping to achieve. If they've got big aspirations for their business, perhaps they should bring in a law firm to help.
I think this is my view. I'm an optimist. Even if businesses haven't got big aspirations, sometimes they take off. It happens with books. Sometimes the book takes off beyond anybody's expectation, and that's when you get the trouble. Really, it's not you kind of float around. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't do it anyway. You might not get kind of caught out, but it's only when you're starting to see real success and traction that you're going to start getting the calls and the hassle. That could absolutely derail a project if you build momentum around a name and an image.
Yes.
I think you're right. It should almost be like a checklist. It's like now it's the most important bit is to make sure it's protected and we're not infringing anybody else's.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, I've actually wondered whether IP has an image problem or is it lawyers? Somebody I was talking to said that lawyers are actually seen to be quite dry and they're the ones who are going to spoil the fun because they'll say, no, you can't do this. But the marketers or designers want to do so.
Yeah, there's a balance. I mean, especially for entrepreneurs, I think the assumption should be this could become big. It could become, a much bigger brand than you've actually anticipated, especially if other partners want to get involved or kind of partner with you and grow it. And I think it's possibly naivety and lack of not ambition, but lack of vision to see actually, I might be better than I think. This idea may be better than I think it is.
Yeah.
And so, I would say on the other side, especially on entrepreneurs that are starting like bootstrapping from the ground up with no investment, when it comes to where they're going to potentially spend their money, they'll do the things that are going to get a direct return in that moment, and then kind of lose sight of the fact that this is a really vital part of the brand process. I haven't got an answer, but I think what you're doing is fantastic and important.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether to try and tackle it by going to the organizations that actually train people like marketers and designers
Yeah.
I think part of the problem is that there is this perception that people understand what IP is,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
gets in the way of them actually really knowing why it matters. So they've got preconceptions about IP is important if you've got a really successful business.
Yeah, I mean, that was my view of it. I think the first time I spoke to a lawyer with my first business was when we were planning to trademark something. It didn't even occur to me that I may be trading with a name that could have problems. And I suppose, interestingly, my first business, just because we chose a name, was called Cabal Group, Cabal. And I was based in Birmingham, and there was a big company called Birmingham Cable. And you would think there's no link at all with that. The spelling's completely different. But surprisingly, we had so many phone calls asking, people at Birmingham Cable did TV, like, cable television. Had so many phone calls, people saying my telly's not working. I'm like, how did you get us? And this is the old days of yellow pages. But yeah, so I think just thinking about your branding and actually thinking if you can actually say the name, because a lot of people couldn't say the name of our business when we were trading, openly as that business.
Yeah, it's quite. Well, I guess in those days the internet wasn't so widespread, because I think now it's very easy for people to be found out if they're using a name that is objectionable.
There's nowhere to hide, is there really? I mean, everything's much more transparent with the internet, and it doesn't take long. As soon as you kind of raise your head and start proactively marketing for people to see it. So yeah, I think you're right. I think the idea of educating, getting that into the idea that designers, entrepreneurs are thinking in terms of what IP is and actually how fundamental it is. It's as fundamental as the other regulatory stuff you do in your business that you wouldn't. I'd like to think I've always used an accountant, but the financial stuff is important. This is just as important.
I mean, it's effectively property. IP. So when you trademark something, you have an asset which is property. It's got property rights similar to land that you might own. And that's actually where all the value of your business is contained. So Rethink Press is, funnily enough, it will be that name.
Yeah, that's all we've got, really. We don't have offices. I don't mind saying that. We work from home offices. It's a network. It's only what we deliver and what we're called that has got inherent value, really.
That's right, yes.
And obviously, because we're a publisher, we've got lots of IP in terms of a license to publish those things. So I find it, I think, just use my own point of reference, naivety is part of it. Kind of not wanting to look at the grown-up stuff is another part of it. And I'm not disparaging other creatives. Like, I'm not saying we're all kind of running around in a kind of childish, everything will be fine way. But I think a lot of the time it's like that stuff just seems a bit more serious, and I want to just do the fun stuff. And then I'd say on top of that, it's just allocating resources and not seeing the significance of actually, just as you would with a house. Like, I've just moved house. You make sure you own that, and you get legal advice to ensure you own that. You're not, that bit of garden that you might think is yours is actually yours and not somebody else's. And we often miss the point when it comes to the intellectual assets we're creating, the branding assets we're creating.
Yeah, I think it's still maybe regarded as something quite esoteric that doesn't really have an impact until somebody actually is in a situation where it does have an impact. I mean, if a business goes into administration, often the only thing available to sell that's got value is the brands. Like HMV, when it went into administration, the brand had quite a lot of value. And it's the same all the time. Whenever a business is split up, if people don't want to buy the shops and all the other aspects, it's the brand that might
that goodwill. And if you've attached goodwill even in a smaller scale to a name that you then find out you can't use when you really need to, exactly, that's a devastating blow for a business.
It is, yeah. So what does IP bring up for you when you hear that it's say, a book on intellectual property?
I think actually you just pointing out the word property, I think it gets thrown around and just shown to IP all the time. I really like the intellectual bit. I like the idea, but actually just seeing it as property simplifies the whole way of looking at it. It's like, what are you creating? What do you actually own?
Yeah.
Are you trying to own something that you can't own because somebody else already owns it?
Yeah.
I think thinking in that sense of it as property is really important. And on the other side, an asset that can generate income. I mean, that's why I'm in publishing. That's why I love publishing as a business model, because I get access to capitalize on lots and lots of little pieces of intellectual property that other people have created, and it's a really, really useful business model. That's why publishers like it as well.
Yes.
To operate, and so things that I've learned as our business has grown is we engage in a lot more foreign language rights and subsidiary rights deals now. And actually, before another publisher will touch that, they want to know that you've got rights to the illustrations in that, the design of the thing. You know, there are so many more things that count as property than just a name. And I know we're specifically talking about branding, but even our look and feel is part of our brand. You know, the way we design books.
Yeah, copyright is actually universally relevant for every business, but especially obviously yours is being in publishing. You know, one of the issues with branding is that if you create something like a logo, you know, you might be able to use the logo, but you don't actually own the copyright in it unless the creator, assigns it to you, and most people are not aware of that. I mean, do people ask for an assignment of the book cover designs at all?
No, so I mean, this is following your really good advice, Shireen. We make sure anybody that works as part of our team, because it's an extended team of freelancers, that the assignment of copyright is to us in any design that happens and any work that's done, so that we can then ensure our authors have really got, you know, when we say they own the copyright and what's being created at the end of the process, after we've you know, run out our license until they say I want it back, that they have got full use of all of those things for the purpose of continuing to publish. I hadn't even considered it, and I don't mind admitting that way back. I mean, this is kind of pre-Rethink, but we got your advice really the early days of Rethink. It had just become it was actually early days. I think you looked at our contract and said, and you raised the point, what do you do in terms of your team? I'm like, I hadn't thought about that yet. So I mean, I would say talk to somebody like you, or you immediately when you're trying to do anything that looks like there is copyright involved, or and especially, you know, just knowing you've got the right to use those brand assets that you've been created. If your creative has created a logo for you, again, it comes down to when it's massively successful. If your designer created the next Coca-Cola and they find out 20 years later, but actually I never assigned the copyright to you, they may be expecting a nice paycheck when you try and do more with that. Exactly. So that's part of it. So in our case, and in order to ensure we can smooth the subsidiary rights, just making sure we've got a list of all the things that comprise that book, so we can say, here it is, it's a clean list, we've got clearance to do that, has become a much more important and significant part of our work. As a publisher.
I suppose you're helping people to create their brand in many ways, because the book is very much part of their messaging
and naming things. I mean, I think that's one of my, within the business, one of the things I think I'm lucky enough to have got a bit of a knack for, and it often comes out of our authors. So I don't claim any special power to give names to things. It's usually the words that kind of combine into what our authors do. And weirdly, for a brand, like for a book, it can be quite descriptive. And as you were always saying, when you try and do that for a brand and trademark, you get into all kinds of problems. I mean, in a way, it's good news for book titles, but it's not so good when you know, if we come up with a particularly great book title, there can be obstacles then to actually.
Yes. Do you search them yourself? I mean, what process do you go through when you choose names?
If it sounds like it, I mean, there should be a better process. We probably should do it every time. If the title sounds like something that's not quite descriptive and could be a brand, I will go and look through. It's IPO, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah, I'll look there at least as a basic check. we'll always check Amazon to see if there's anything else out there. And that's kind of as far as we go. But if it sounds big, I always say talk to a lawyer. You need to, if you're going to, especially if you're planning to build, brand assets, a website off this, maybe a program and other things beyond that, it would be talk to a professional to make sure you've got those things covered.
I've actually trademarked brandtuned as in the US, EU, and UK.
Yeah.
Because I know what could go wrong, and how much more expense and hassle is involved than just,
from the start,
regarding it as a cost of business
right. Just seeing it as a normal cost of business, as you would an accountant, as you would say any other part of it. I think that needs to come really early on any new business venture you're creating.
Yeah, it's a shame. So when you trained as a graphic designer, were there any lectures at all on IP?
Well, as I say, I came in a bit of an odd angle. So I just did college. I only did college and had a portfolio and got a job. So I didn't do any formal training. So I honestly can't tell you from a degree point of view. My feeling is absolutely not, because it wasn't in the curriculum in terms of what skill they were training for.
Yeah.
And I think the assumption is, you'll just get lawyers to do that bit and you work with lawyers. But of course, if you don't know what you don't know about IP, that's when you don't think to ask a lawyer, because you don't know there's any
there is an issue. Yeah.
So I think that's the missing piece. It's not necessarily that brand creators should get really good at doing that work. They just need to know that part of their duty of care to their client is talk to a lawyer that understands this stuff before we take it any further.
That's right. Like you, to be able to do some preliminary checks themselves, and then to know when to say to someone, go to a lawyer.
Yeah. And especially, the clue, and we have fallen foul of it every so often, where we thought they had a registered trademark, but it wasn't quite registered enough. And I won't go into detail on that, but there are levels and levels of protection that you don't know about as an outsider if that's not your skill. So you can fall foul of that. But yeah, as soon as an author says, I think I'm going to trademark this title, I'll be like, talk to a lawyer, because that may not, having a title that works for the context of a book that's descriptive about what's in the book is very different than saying I'm now going to own an asset with this. But even then, you can still get into trouble. Like, if you put the Coca-Cola handbook, it might be a descriptive book on how to drink Coca-Cola. You're still going to get into trouble. You can't just pinch brand names and trade off them. It just feels so grey. In an ideal world, it would be lawyer on every single thing we did. Is this design okay? And I think there's obviously got to be a bit of a balance of kind of like, feel your way in and then do it. But I would say, as a standard starting point in business, IP should be taken as seriously as your kind of financial regulatory stuff.
I think part of the problem is the cost of it. Going and getting one-to-one advice from a lawyer can be expensive. So that's one of the issues I'm thinking about. How can I introduce something where people have access to the basic information, and then without much cost, a sort of ability to ask questions, maybe in a forum situation where you don't have to pay for one-to-one advice. I think lawyers could do more to create something accessible.
I think it's a little bit like you don't know how much it's going to cost, do you? Because you just don't know, and the reality is you can't say it's just going to be this, because you don't know what's necessarily going to come along when you try and do it. Like an example is when you helped us register Rethink Press. There were things down the line that we wouldn't have known about had we not gone through the exercise. And it was absolutely, so I felt so good that we'd done the process, because if we hadn't and carried on trading without actually registering, we could have had real trouble later on as the business has carried on succeeding and growing. We would have got more attention. So I think, I think your point about making it kind of feel more accessible, I suppose a checklist or even a series of kind of information infographics that say, thinking of doing this, you need to talk to a lawyer. Thinking of doing this, you really need to talk to a lawyer.
To celebrate the release of the brand-tuned book, we're hosting a launch event on the 28th of September when key figures like Rory Sutherland, David Archer, and Rob Meyerson are interviewed on video. The book is about how to create a distinctive brand using IP to stand out. It's in line with the evidence-based research from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute into how brands grow, which highlighted the important role identifiers like the brand name, logo, symbols, etc., play in bringing brands to mind in consumers' memories. It's critically important to ensure the identifiers created for your brand are legally distinctive and protected in the right way so they prevent competitor copying. Do register to attend and take part in the special offers available. Sign up at brandtuned.com. The link is in the show notes. Talking to a lawyer could be expensive, so I'm thinking of saying, okay, you're thinking of using a logo. This is the basic information to know about. You can trademark it, can't trademark it, whatever. And
I'm sure, I mean, your book will go a long way towards that. But yeah, I think just simplifying that, and I think thinking about creatives and entrepreneurs where they are, I think the simpler the better, with like a 3, do's and don'ts, some simple things, or a checklist of, have you checked these 3 things before you go any further?
Yeah, I think people like to be independent. So having to work with a lawyer just doesn't work because A, it could be very costly, and B, it doesn't give you independence to create brands. So
I wonder, as a further thing, I'm sure you've thought about this, like if you had brand-tuned accredited designers that know their way around it enough to know when you need further help, and at least will avoid the pitfalls. I mean, just having that would become a selling point for them as well. It's like, I've got this accreditation which sets me apart from another designer. I think that could be a useful thing. And I'm kind of in a lot of ways glad I'm not a graphic designer anymore, because there'd be so many things I'd need to get right. And as a graphic designer, one of the things is nailing that client brief. When you've gone through that creative process and you nailed the brief, I suppose some graphic designers may be kind of wary of, now we'll make sure that we can actually use it, because I think I've run out of I've run out of creative juice on this particular project, and if I get a no to this, it's back to the drawing board. But I would say for most creatives, and this is my view, when we get pushback, so we work with client with on book titles. If we get a book title that's particularly amazing, and we're like, oh no, somebody else has got that title, we find a book appears on Amazon within the same time frame. Often you get a better title as a result of having to go back to the drawing board and just go that one step further, and you get a better name. So I think just being open to that happening is important. But, whether you're open to it or not, the reality will still bite if you don't protect that asset you're creating.
Yeah, I think one of the problems is that IP is inherently complex. I mean, it's annoying as a lawyer as well, not to be able to give nice cut and dried advice all the time. And however much you want to, there are some situations which are really not possible to give people comfort that they need. So, like, for example, if you choose a name that lots of other people have got a similar element in their name, so not really generic, but it's in widespread use, say Fusion or something is in the name, you're going to get lots of other brands that are using that name. And it's very difficult to give somebody the go-ahead and say you'll definitely not have problems, because there are so many people using Fusion that none of them can claim exclusive rights.
And what I'd say causes confusion, doesn't it? Fusion, you put con before it, that's what happens. Nobody knows who really owns it, and you can't really ever kind of get that traction that you might want to get as an entrepreneur.
Exactly, yes. So people don't like distinctive names that stand out and don't mean anything, but actually they are the simplest check, the easiest way to stand out, you know.
And I think, as anybody, you know, any good brand person will say, like, the image and the name, it's what comes next is really branding. It's what you hook to those assets that really matters to the business. So, you know, often trying to get that killer perfect name isn't as important as actually building a business and reputation that you can attach to that name.
That's right.
You know, Rethink Press is meaningless, really. It's not.
It's just a name. Once you've got a name, it's
and it's what we do. You know, that actually reputational stuff we go to, and now people are seeking us out. If we had to change the name, it'd be like back to square one. We're kind of having to keep telling everybody, you know, here we are. We've changed our name.
You've got a certain reputation.
Yeah. So
you see, the problem though is that there is never any knowing whether somebody's going to take objection to someone's name, even if they haven't got solid rights.
Yeah.
It's very possible for people to be quite territorial and object to something.
And I think that's just, it's kind of the nature. The metaphor of business is competitive. Yeah, it is competitive, and it's kind of like, I want to hold up. I want the whole board. I want monopoly on this, and it's a shame that it's not more collaborative. But the reality is, it isn't. So while I feel kind of that's a shame, like we can all work together, and a great example again of how you negotiated our brand use. There's a charity that uses the word Rethink.
Yes.
That did object kind of calmly and, you know, rationally. But we still had to resolve that with them. It wasn't as simple as saying, you know, they weren't saying we own all rights to any use of Rethink in any kind of name. But at the same time, they wanted to make sure their corner of that was protected. And I mean, that was fascinating to me to know that. And it kind of, it showed the kind of caliber of their organization, really, that they were open to negotiating rather than, you know, kind of.
Well, often it happens like that people settle, you know, they have some reservations, they want those reservations to be taken on board, and then everyone's happy. So, but that really, for a startup or a small business, they regard that as a disaster, and they would think that they should have been forewarned that this could happen, because they haven't really got the funds to deal with that. And so I think you almost need a different strategy if you don't want to come up against trademarks.
I think it starts from day one. Like, it's fine to trade a little bit, but as soon as you start actually thinking, like, I'm trading and I'm attracting reputation to an image and a look and feel, that's where I think it is just a vital thing to at least consider, at least ensure you're not infringing anything else, because that would be, I suppose, like, I'm going all the way back in time now. It may have been 2001, 2000. One of my clients ran a sales program called Spiral Selling. And if you know anything about this, there's a methodology that was developed with IBM. There's a methodology called spin selling, which is world famous. They wrote him a really like, do not, you know, you can't even, like, because spiral spin, you could see the parallel, and he could have probably argued that because it was a small trainer. It was just enough. That cease and desist was enough for him to go, oh my, I'm not touching that ever again. I'll rethink my whole model as a result of it. And I remember that was my kind of my first, you know, observation of it in action when it can be quite, you know, a very assertively kind of
they are, yes. I must say, if I'm choosing a name and there is any risk that somebody's going to object, I decide not to go ahead with that, because basically it's not worth spending time and money in disputes if you don't need to. You know. So that's why I think choose well at the beginning, and you avoid all sorts of problems.
Oh, fab. No, I agree. I mean, it's great. I feel like I've been lucky enough to know you for quite a while now, and we've used your services many times to help us ensure we're not getting in trouble. I suppose this is the same for every entrepreneur. You still think every little thing you do, really, you know, in an ideal world, we should talk to you on about everything, and sometimes we just go, let's feel our way a little bit first. I mean, have you got a view on that? Is that like a bad strategy, or is that kind of just an entrepreneurial thing? You kind of get in a bit of trouble before you might necessarily talk to somebody that can ensure you're not going to get any anymore.
Well, you've probably developed quite a good sense of what you can and can't get away with. So it depends who you are. I suspect you're okay, but somebody with very little experience may not make the right call.
Yeah. I mean, you see, I suppose you see, like on a smaller scale, it's not really branding, but I suppose it is. You see so many infringements of font usage and other parts of the puzzle. You just think, are you really squeaky clean there? Because you're probably not. Or when people share memes or video or music in their content when they're just doing social strategy. I think there's so many ways you can get yourself in trouble now. So many more ways.
I mean, I take risks, like, for example, using somebody's logo. If you want to say Coca-Cola looks like this, theoretically you're infringing copyright unless there's a newsworthy item that you're reporting on. But I take that risk because I suspect that Coca-Cola isn't going to come after me because it's
a reasonable and rational risk as well, isn't it? That technically it might be wrong, but like you're saying something about Coca-Cola, they want the brand to be proliferated, so it's probably unless you're saying something bad about Coca-Cola,
it's not doing any harm, and if anything, it gets their name out there more.
I mean, and one thing we've cracked down on in our business is decorative quotes at the beginning of chapters. It's like we get rights clearance. We checked in with the PLR, the I can't remember the acronym, that you need rights clearance on all of those quotes if they're used in a decorative way. And I'll say, like, I don't look right back into my history before Rethink Press, but there are several books that haven't been as squeaky clean. And my view would be, rational, realistic view is we're just quoting other people that are going to get benefit from seeing that, but technically you're still supposed to clear it. And I always thought, like, stay away from poetry and song lyrics. But even quoting something somebody may have said in a TED talk and shining a spotlight on them could potentially get you in the wrong.
Wow. Yeah, I must say I'd hate to be in the publishing industry. When I saw the sort of rights clearance I'd need to do, I just thought this is ridiculous.
And really, this is about the kind of, like, I suppose the scale of the business. As we've grown up, we've got a publishing manager that looks after all of these things, and she's really, really hot on doing the right thing and not falling foul of the rules. If it was me still running that side of it, I probably wouldn't have even paid attention to the seminar that was saying really be really clear on this. You can get into problems.
I take a pragmatic view on a lot of those things. As you say, if it's a small quote and I'm giving credit to the book, I can't see that there's a need to go and get clearance. But, I know publishers have to, but I personally wouldn't do it if I was self-publishing.
Yeah, and that was my view prior to seeing this, and then handing over to somebody that it's their job. They've got to feel they can do the right thing in our business. And for me to say no, technically we'll be okay. It doesn't really cut it because they want to do the right thing. So I'm learning more and more, and I think that's the thing. Like you say, I probably do have a good feel for where you can kind of sail close to the wind and where you can't. But it still doesn't hurt to talk to you or somebody like you to say, what's going on here. And there've been other times I can't remember, but we've called on you for advice, and sometimes it's a very simple, just do that, or that'll be okay. I can't see an issue with that. And other times it's like, this is what would have to happen in order for that to happen. And you're like, I may just drop that idea. It wasn't such a good idea after all. And sometimes knowing what not to do in business is really useful.
I think really the name is probably the most important thing that business owners need to focus on getting right, because everything is captured in that name, And then other things maybe.
I wonder, because a lot of people just think as long as they can get the .com, they've got the name, and I think that's as far as people's brain goes in terms of thinking they've protected it.
No, you see, if it's too similar to somebody else's name, that could cause a problem. .com is not the be and end all at all.
And I imagine, I'm sure you got like you got access to the cases where this happens. some people have probably lost domain names because they had no right to have them in the first place.
Yeah. Well, I give an example in the book where somebody lost their whole business because he had chosen a similar name to a competitor of his without realizing this would be a problem, and got the .com. But after spending a lot of money promoting the domain, he had them confiscated and had to start from scratch, you know.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible, but just another warning. You know, this can happen. It can happen, especially when you're successful. No, you don't lose anything really if you've got nothing to lose, do you? You only lose it when you gained that kind of growth.
So thank you very much, Joe, for appearing on the podcast. I just really want to finish off by asking you, as you know so much about books and good books, if you could name a few books that are really good for somebody setting up a business or brand to read.
Well, I would read all of your books, obviously. And you know, you can pay me later, but no, you know, Legally Branded sets that up really clearly, and it made me think much more seriously about the whole process. So there's that. I don't necessarily think you need a book on that part of it. Like as a professional in branding, you need to know that it's an important part of your job, and if you want to be world class in terms of helping organizations to name and grow things, you need to really consider that legal side. So I'd say read all of your books. I don't think there are. I mean, honestly, I don't think there are any other books that actually do what you do. Do you know any? I'm assuming you don't.
But how about to be inspired in business? Do you?
Oh, right. Yeah. So one of my favorite books is actually it's an old book and it's kind of out of print. Is by a chap called Guy Kawasaki, and it's How to Drive Your Competition Crazy.
All right.
It's one of my favorite books. There are lots of models in there for how to do things that will make competitors, especially bigger competitors, if you're an upstart or you're a challenger brand, how to do things that are going to just really upset them because they won't be able to respond. So I love that book, and I got them behind me. I used to always hang on to about 3 or 4 copies, and I would give that book to anybody.
Really?
Yeah, who would.
And why is it out of print?
I just think it's probably past its prime in terms of the references, because he was the chief advocate, or I forget, there was a chief evangelist for Apple. That was one of his kind of claims to fame. And so the references that he uses are kind of old now, but it's fundamentally a solid book. So not a lot of people have heard of it, and maybe that's why it's out of print. Maybe it didn't sell as well as it should have. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Joe.
Thanks, Shireen. It's lovely to see you.
How can people get in touch with you if they want to publish their own book?
Yeah. Rethinkpress.com is the best place to go. You can find me on LinkedIn and Facebook, but on Facebook, I'm just /get published. I felt quite pleased I managed to get that in the early days. But yeah, you'll find us if you search for Rethink Press. You'll find us all over the place. And I'd say one thing, just if I can get this plug in. At the moment, what we're really working on, and it's going really well, we run a program called Book Builder, book-builder.com, where we help people who are right at the early stages of coming out with their book idea and thinking of the title and actually planning to write the book. That takes you through that in 90 days. And it's run by my co-director, Lucy. And we're having massive success with that for our budding authors. So is it suitable for somebody who just has an idea that they want? It is, yeah. And all I'd say is they really need to have a business first. We work, that's where we fit perfectly. They've got a business already. They know they need to write a book, and they don't necessarily know how to put that together and position it in the right way. And yeah, we're loving it. It's a great program. We're on our 4th intake. It's a 90-day process, and we're getting amazing results and getting lots of people through. Okay, we'll add it to the show notes. We'll add a link. Thank you so much. Good. Lovely. Well, thank you very much indeed, Joe. Thanks, Shireen. Bye. Bye. That's it for this week. Do subscribe to the brandtuned newsletter to get weekly updates. I'd also love to get your feedback. Just send me an email to info@brandtuned.com. Finally, if you liked the episode,
please do share it with your friends and colleagues and review it on iTunes or whichever platform you use to listen to podcasts. If you leave us a 5-star review, it means more people will listen and we can spread the word much more quickly about the podcast. Thank you and bye for now.